Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the programme this evening, our deep dive into One Nation, One Election. Today in Parliament, the bill proposing the synchronization of national and state elections was introduced, igniting a fiery debate across the political spectrum. On one side, proponents argue that simultaneous polls would reduce administrative costs, it would boost governance efficiency, minimize the disruption caused by frequent elections. But critics, including major opposition parties, see this as a threat to India's federal structure. They argue that it might centralize power, undermining the autonomy of states and potentially leading to constitutional issues if the Lok Sabha dissolves early. On the show tonight, Harish Salve, Abhishek Manu Singhvi and NK Singh. Mr. Salve and Mr. Singh were a part of the Kovind committee that recommended One Nation, One poll. Abhishek Singhvi, the senior Congress leader, says ONOE, as it's known, should not happen. The headlines at this hour. A heated debate on the constitution in the Rajya Sabha. The Home Minister attacks the Gandhi family and Congress party, claims that Rahul Gandhi carries around a blank constitution bill, as the RJD's Manoj Jha says Nehru defended parliamentary democracy. The Shiv Sena leader Uddhav Thackeray met Maharashtra Chief Minister Devendra Fadnavis in Nagpur today during the winter session of the Assembly, their first meeting since Fadnavis returned as Chief Minister. In a significant policy shift, the government announces an overhaul of the entrance exam process. The National Testing Agency will stop conducting recruitment exams from 2025. They'll only conduct higher education entrance tests. And a grand roadshow for 18-year-old chess champion D. Gukesh in Chennai. He's later honoured by the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister in a grand event, our world champion who's just 18. But our top story today in Parliament, the bill proposing the synchronization of national and state elections was introduced. That's clearly ignited a fiery debate across the political spectrum. What we are going to be doing on this program is bringing you a deep dive into the situation, what all the major parties had to say, the constitutional issues, the administrative issues, and those who say that there are significant economic benefits with One Nation, One poll.
Beyond the seventh schedule of the Constitution is the basic structure doctrine. And that basic structure doctrine spells out that there are certain features of the Indian Constitution which are beyond the amending power of this House also. One of the essential features is federalism and the structure of our democracy. And therefore, the bills which have been moved by the Honourable Minister of Law and Justice absolutely assault the basic structure of the Constitution and are beyond the legislative competence of this House, and therefore they need to be opposed ab initio, and the introduction of those bills have to be stopped.
सर्वोच्च न्यायालय ने, माननीय सर्वोच्च न्यायालय ने केशवानंद भारती केस में 1973 में इस फेडरल स्ट्रक्चर के बारे में बात की है। उसमें 5-7 बिंदु उन्होंने तय किए हैं। बाद में और मामलों में भी कुछ बिंदु जोड़े हैं, कुछ विषय, जैसे जुडिशियल रिव्यू, फेडरल कैरेक्टर ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर बिटवीन लेजिस्लेचर, एग्जीक्यूटिव एंड जुडिशरी, सेकुलर कैरेक्टर ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, सुप्रीमेसी ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन। ये इस बिल में कहीं भी आघात नहीं हो रहा है, कुछ भी नहीं हो रहा है इसमें। जो बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर में कहीं भी कोई छेड़छाड़ नहीं की जा रही है। आगे मैं ये कहता हूं कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने केशवानंद भारती जजमेंट के साथ साथ वामन राव, एल चंद्रन कुमार ने कुछ सब्जेक्ट और जोड़े, लेकिन ये इससे कोई ना तो संसद की शक्ति में कमी आ रही है और ना कोई विधानसभा में शक्ति दी है संविधान, उसमें कमी आ रही है।
Joining us now, Parijita Sarangi, the MP of the BJP in the Lok Sabha. I'm also joined by Pradeep Bhatti of the Samajwadi Party. Thank you both very much for being with us. Parijita Sarangi, one of the key points that the opposition raises over and over again is that One Nation, One election would undermine federalism. How does the BJP respond?
To every action of Prime Minister Modi, there would be an equal and opposite negative reaction from the opposition parties. I think we are aware of this. To once again bring about this particular reform, I think is a major step, and I would call it one of the biggest reforms of Indian government since independence. And this is not something new. I think we all need to understand this and appreciate this and acknowledge this. General elections to the House of the People and the state legislatures were being held simultaneously for 20 years, 1951-52 election, 57, 62 and 67 elections. And thereafter we knew what happened. In fact, the dissolution of many of the state assemblies in 1968 and 69 actually led to the stoppage of this particular practice in the country. And in fact, this was a wonderful practice which was going on, and we know that the dissolution of the state assemblies in Punjab, UP, Bihar and West Bengal led to the end of this particular practice, which was very much there. And let me tell you that whatever the logic, whatever the argument, whatever the justification and the reasons given by Sri Arjun Meghwalji and all those who actually stand in favor of this particular reform, would definitely like to, kind of focus on a couple of things, like there would be less expenditure, number one. Number two, we are aware of the fact that the entire procedure right now is very time consuming.
Okay, ma'am, hold on. We'll get into the nitty-gritty in a moment.
2014 to 2016, I would like to inform the House that there were about 15.
Ma'am, we'll get into the nitty-gritty in a moment.
15.
But let me just keep the strike rotating. Pradeep Bhatti, the key point is on federalism. And what Aparajita Sarangi says is that we've had it in the past. There was no argument on federalism being undermined then. Why raise that point now?
Thank you and good evening to all. Let me start with, in democracy, there is no me, myself and ek akela sab pe bhari mindset. It is itself a undemocratic and autocracy mindset. Democracy for us is plurality, and we won't start from it only, will not stop at one nation, one election. It might go up to one nation, one party, and later on one nation, one leader. That's lead to a dictatorship. In this way, there is another conspiracy, we believe, that from poll rigging to destroying an Indian constitution. There are only three reasons, basic reasons, which have been given in the favor of one nation, one election, is cost saving, time saving, and avoiding policy paralysis. So let me start with the cost itself. As per the media report, 1.35 lakh crore spent in 2024 Lok Sabha election, and out of that 60,000 crore was spent by the BJP itself, approximately 50% of the total expenditure in 2024 election. So let me ask them to first walk the talk and reduce their expenditure. The one of the richest party of India. I know maybe
the point that there is an unfair playing field when it comes to some parties like the BJP who've got more financial resources, others don't. But you did raise, Mr. Bhatti, a point, and I don't understand that when you spoke about election rigging. There is not an iota of evidence which has been presented to the Election Commission or is seen to be credible about EVMs being rigged.
I'll tell you, we have raised that in 2022 when our honorable leader deposited 18,000 affidavits stating that these names were put out of the list. And before that, Election Commission sent notice to our leader stating that you are only making false.
So you're talking about of voters being removed from the ballot. Okay, 1 second. Aparajita ma'am, please respond to that. Firstly, the concern is that the BJP, and he didn't use the BJP, but he mentioned, I mean, that's what he's talking about, would rig the election process, and there'd be more of what he alleges, that people's names would be missing. How would you respond?
Nothing could be more ridiculous than this. When they win the elections, EVMs are right. Jharkhand, absolutely no problem. But when they lose the elections, like in Maharashtra and Haryana, it's the fault of the EVMs. And why should BJP get into it? I mean, it is always, the people who decide, and there have been instances like in Odisha. I belong to Odisha. Like in Odisha, in 2014 and in 2019, let me tell you, simultaneous elections were going on, and in one particular booth, every booth, there were 2 EVMs. People would be so conscientious, they would vote for one party in one EVM and another party in another EVM. So there is absolutely no question of considering the voters so very, I would say, without any, sense. I think voters are quite smart these days, and they know whom to go for. So I think if Prime Minister Modi is winning every time all the elections, and he is here for the 3rd time, and his popularity is gaining ground with every passing day, because people like him, because of his policies, because of his execution style, because of his major reforms like this. This is a huge reform which is going to take place in the country, and I think all of us should be proud of. In fact, let me tell you that there are figures which support our contention. This is not something new.
Mr. Bhatia,
we are doing something which was already there. We are trying to bring about again.
Got it, ma'am. Mr. Bhati, 3 points. Number 1, cost efficiency, the BJP says, would be enhanced. Administrative efficiency would be enhanced. Thirdly, economic growth. Our GDP would be enhanced as well. How would you respond to the 3 points the BJP says, which is why this should go through?
Vishnu, I'll come on this later, but let me, Madam has raised 2-3 points.
We don't have much time. I would suggest you come on to this quickly.
I'll wind up in just a few seconds. Please do not ridicule your own supreme leader, Mr. Advani, who was raising EVM issue from 2009 to 2013. And he was engaged in pulling all the parties to support him. Second thing about the cost saving, the cost saving, every MP candidate, the total limit is 95 lakhs. And when it comes to party expenditure, it is not mentioned and it is not specified. So let the first do that according, as I have already told you, that 60,000 crores have been spent by the individual party. And we are not in the presidential form of government. We democracy. We are in a parliamentary democracy where it will be dangerous of giving an absolute power for 5 years or undermining the federalism by either imposing president rule or calling a midterm poll, or it might call for horse trading also. When you lose the majority, it will be a situation like Maharashtra. We'll call for this thing, for swearing in at 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. So these kind of situations will keep on getting.
I get the point that you're mentioning.
You will have these kind of situations
on
going
the
forward.
entire issue of instability caused if an election, if a government falls early, how would you respond? Aparajita ji, then this is your last 45 seconds. And then we wrap this up.
You see, there are countries where simultaneous elections are being held. I say this with all emphasis. South Africa, Sweden, Indonesia, Belgium, Philippines, and they have had very good experience with this entire strategy. And apart from this, cost effectiveness and less time consumption, etc., I would definitely like to add one thing. In fact, the entire administrative machinery goes haywire. They leave their path where regulatory works are being done, and they are actually, they have to go for the model code of conduct clamping, and so the regular administration actually comes to a grinding halt. So entire development also is hit. So we have to take into account that part also. Since I was in the administration for 24 years, if every year 5 state assembly elections would be held, what would be the condition in those states? Imagine. So I think this is a very pragmatic approach to things, and we have to accept that this is not being recommended or not being brought about for the first time by Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
That's an important point. It's
the
not
Law
the first
Commission
time
of
that
India
this
in
has
its
been
170th report also had recommended.
All right, Aparajita ji, interrupting you only because I'm completely out of time. We've got several other experts on this program. Pradeep ji, thank you very much for being with us as well. Well, joining us now, Mr. Harish Salve, somebody who's been part of the process in the Kovind committee of recommending one nation, one election for India. Thank you, sir, very much for being with us. Let's just go through several of the points which the opposition has raised, and I'm try and get an idea of where you stand, on this, and the panel stands on this. Firstly, on undermining federalism, the opposition argues that one nation, one election would erode the federal structure of India by synchronizing state assembly elections with national elections, potentially reducing the autonomy of states and diminishing the focus on regional issues. Is this correct?
So let's just deconstruct what you said.
Yeah.
Having elections together is damaging to federalism, which means you must have 26 states, or what's the last count? We have 26 or 28
Yes.
states, and one union. So you must have 29 elections every year. And then you must space them out. But the year is only 12 months. Anything less than this undermines federalism. Is that the argument? I don't understand this. Vishnu, where is this coming? What is federalism? Let us take a step back. And I'm not a social media person. I'm not on Twitter or X or Y or Z, whatever it's called. So that vocabulary is alien to me. As a student of constitutional law, I start by saying, what is federalism? Federalism is the constitutional architecture which defines the role of the union and the states. It defines the divide of the federal versus the state legislative fields. It divides the the executive powers go with the legislative fields. It divides the institutions, the judicial institution, the other institutions, federal institutions, the state institutions, and the interplay and the role of each is what is federalism. So when Parliament exercises extraordinary power and dismisses the state government only for political ends, and that's the important point, for political ends,
Yes.
then it is a breach of federalism. So that's an abuse of power. If Parliament was to take away legislative powers of the state, what did Delhi government allege and what did Supreme Court hold? That on a construction of the NCT law, the appointment of civil servants should be by the Delhi government. Okay? Of course, that was subject to law made by Parliament. Parliament corrected that interpretation. I can understand issues like that being characterized as issues affecting federalism.
Yes.
Because that affects the architecture of the union and states, except where union territories are concerned, constitutionally they are all part of the union. So it's only by parliamentary law that there is a divide. But tomorrow, if Parliament was to turn around and say that the union government will nominate the chief minister, obviously it will destroy federalism. It has to be the elected members of the House. Or if they were to say that you will not make any law without the permission of the union government, obviously that will destroy federalism.
Okay.
Because each.
Okay.
So those are matters of the constitutional architecture.
All right. Let me come to my next point. What they say is that there are legal and constitutional challenges. I'm trying to understand this from you. The argument is that implementing one nation, one poll would require major amendments to the constitution, including articles related to the tenure of elected bodies. And they contend that these changes are complex, it necessitates state ratification, and could be seen as altering the basic structure of the constitution. How would you respond?
Let's take it step by step. If it affects federalism, it affects basic structure. If it doesn't affect federalism, it doesn't affect basic structure. So that is a repetitive argument. Let's come back to major amendment. Now, major and minor are very approximate terms.
Right.
You can have 6 minor amendments and you can have 1 major amendment. One major amendment was adding 2 words to Article 31C. Original 31C said any law which was for Article 39B and C, which basically were property laws, will not be amenable to a challenge on part. You just deleted that 39B and said any law for all or any directive. Very small amendment. Correct? That violated the basic structure because it made nonsense of Part 3 of the Constitution. So that amendment, the 42nd amendment brought by the then Congress government, emasculated the Constitution. 3 words. So we don't measure constitutional amendments by their width, we measure them by their impact. At the end of the day, what are we saying? The Constitution says, and this is an important point, the Constitution says the tenure of a house of the state legislature or of the union parliament shall not be more than. It doesn't say shall not be less.
Right, right.
Why does it say shall not be less than? It says it shall not be less than because never, ever can you have even for a day a government which doesn't enjoy the confidence of the people. That is why there is no minimum. Now, let me come back to what is going to happen. Once there are 2 steps. One is synchronizing all elections.
Yes.
Once synchronized, be it Parliament or be it the state, each will be elected for 5 years. But if there is a midterm election in either, the new election will be for a balanced period. Now, if everybody gets elected for 5 years today and Parliament fails, in 3 years a new election is held, does it destroy federalism? No. If Parliament fails in 3 years because of political compulsions, does it destroy federalism?
Right.
No. So why will having a system in which you get 3 years or a truncated period because of lack of political stability destroy federalism? Whether you should have it or should not have it, you may say there are other reasons, it's very inconvenient, we will have frequent elections. I can understand those arguments, but don't raise it to a constitutional pitch saying it destroys federalism. Because you have arguments for having synchronized elections, correct? 1% of GDP is lost with elections. All the time government is in election mode, etc., etc. The report lists a lot of compelling reasons why you should have one nation, one election. You may agree, you may disagree, and that's what these reports are all about.
All right. I get your point on federalism. The other argument, I mean, one among many that have been raised is logistically, is it feasible? Those who say that it potentially doesn't work, say that it would be a logistical nightmare of managing simultaneous elections given our geography, which includes different election
Commission
cycles.
didn't say so. Election Commission didn't say so. That's not a matter for us. And mind you, somebody said we don't have enough AVMs. I'm sorry, comments like this are made by senior people. Does the report say this will start from the next 6 months?
No.
By the time everything is synchronized and everything is put in place, maybe 3 years, 4 years from now. So, if we do decide to go this way, in 4 years' time, we can't manufacture enough EVMs. Come on. And ultimately, it will be for the Election Commission and the people who are running this. Today, Election Commission made a presentation to the committee saying, if you give us a year, a particular period of time, and you tell us this is what the exercise will be, it will be less troublesome, not more troublesome. Because when elections are held in a state, all the Lok Sabha seats of that state will also be covered.
Okay.
So you will have maybe blocks where elections are held, like even today, parliamentary elections were held in blocks.
Sure.
The same states where the parliamentary elections were being held, the state elections could have been held. I don't know. I'm not an expert in the subject. None of us are experts in the subject. People who have conducted elections say it is totally doable.
All right.
Because all you're doing is conducting in that same geographical space election for both houses.
The next concern that it could impact regional parties. That the concern is that national issues would overshadow local issues. That benefits larger national parties at the expense of regional ones, this could marginalize regional parties that focus more on state-specific issues, potentially leading to a more uniform political landscape dominated by national parties. Now, I'm not making a value judgment. I'm only asking you a question. I don't know if that's necessarily bad or good, particularly in the context of wanting to unify India. But that's an argument raised. That diversity would be lost.
To me, it is bad for one reason. After having failed exit polls, after having failed cephalogist reports, after having shock after shock in elections, all parties have suffered shocks in elections. Have the political class not figured out to not take the Indian voter for granted? The Indian voter knows whom he wants to vote for and why he wants to vote. He may have his own reasons, which you may agree or disagree. One thing is very clear. Our votes have been decisive. Our mandates have been decisive. The Indian voter knows what he is doing. So please don't pass this supercilious, facetious judgment on the Indian voter saying, poor chap will be confused. He won't know whom to vote for if you have all these elections to them. It's not such a big deal. Ultimately, you'll be voting for two people, your MP and your MLA. And you will know which party you want. I've heard comments like in the past, some people, when you say, oh, we don't want to vote for so-and-so party, why? Modi is not going to be our chief minister. We prefer the chief minister from so-and-so party. You think the voters are not this discerning? Of course they are. I'm not a politician. I don't understand the street politics. But I think this kind of vote of no confidence against the voters is what has ailed our political system. It's time the politicians of India took a reality check on this. I don't think this really works.
A final point is that there is, and it's a political question. I know you're a lawyer, and I don't know if you're comfortable with this, but the argument of political parties in the opposition is that there's been a lack of consensus and consultation among stakeholders, including opposition parties, state governments. They say that this is being pushed through unilaterally without sufficient debate or consensus.
So let's take it step by step. The committee invited members of a number of political parties. I know for a fact Congress party refused to join the committee because they started by saying this whole exercise is a nonsense. Fair enough. But then don't say there is no consultation because you were invited to be part of it. As far as the process is concerned, it has to be 2/3 present and voting. It'll have to be a constitution amendment. I believe today it has been referred to a joint parliamentary committee.
Yes.
Where also, and mind you, let the political system make no mistake, they are not the only stakeholders in this. Elections are not only about getting elected and coming to power. Elections are about your and my daily life. It's about whom we want to govern us and how we want them to work once we have put them in office, including running the government on a day-to-day basis instead of being in election mode all the time. So there are a number of stakeholders who have different interests. And I want to bring up my favorite point, which is not in this report, which is something which I strongly feel about. The biggest bane of Indian elections is not regionalism. The biggest bane of Indian elections is not all this. The biggest bane of Indian elections is the role which unaccounted money plays in Indian elections. There was an attempt made to fix this in a deeply flawed judgment. The Supreme Court struck down the whole thing, threw the baby out of the bathwater. But that's a discussion for another day. The one solution to all this is partial state funding of elections. And if you have one nation, one election, it makes it much easier to achieve partial state funding.
Super talking to you, and thank you for clarifying all of these points. As somebody who's, written and been a part of that entire panel, I appreciate you answering all of these questions. Thank you very much indeed, sir. Thank you. Dr. Singhvi, thank you very much for joining us. One nation, one poll. It's very much an agenda of this government. But I'm just trying to look at the numbers situation. As I understand it, while a simple majority of those present and voting is enough to allow the bill to be tabled, you need legislation to amend the constitution, and that needs 2/3 of members present voting, right, in its favor. Do you believe that the government doesn't or lacks that at the moment?
Well, these are inconvenient truths which the government doesn't want you and I and the nation to discuss. We don't know. It will come to the test. That stage has not come now. The bill may well be referred to the JPC. The bill may come up in the next session. So today we are certainly not at that stage. But your question is a political one. Let me tell you that it's going to be either very narrow or not be passed at all. There are lots of features in this bill which will be objected to by their so-called allies. And above all, and this is the crucial takeaway, a narrative is being spread that no state ratification is needed. I find it bizarre. I don't know who is advising on what legal principle. But here you have a law which, forget everything else for a moment, changes the cycle directly of electoral politics at the state level. It also, of course, does it for municipal and panchayati elections. It synchronizes them all. Leave aside parliamentary for a moment. Now, if I change your cycle, in effect, it means that if Vishnu Som stands for an MLA and I win and I defect or my seat falls vacant, then Vishnu Som will again fight me after 2.5 years. But if elected, you or me will have only a 2.5-year balance term. That's the heart of this bill. You tell me one thing, with this kind of direct interference by law on the will of the majority at the state level, how on earth can anybody even suggest that this will not require state ratification? Is my question to myself. But I'll tell you the problem and the answer, Vishnu. This is a preconceived notion. It is the favorite hobby horse and theme of no less than the exalted numero uno of this country. So the question put to the committee is not if it is desirable, good, correct, virtuous on its own merits. The question decided by the committee is, it must be done, tell us how. It's not the if question which the committee addresses, it addresses the how question. And therefore you make these blunders. And I am absolutely confident that if somebody tries to get it through without state ratification, this is going to be held to be unconstitutional.
But Dr. Singhvi, even at the moment, the India Alliance is the support of 234, right? So if the amendment has to pass, which as I understand it requires a 2/3 majority, then the BJP will need support from non-aligned parties, right? And there are a couple of possibilities. There's the YSR Congress that has, I think, 4 MPs, and the Akali Dal, which has 1. Both of them have pledged their support, but it's not a done deal as yet. So therefore, do you believe that, that is a process the BJP will need to complete before anything happens here?
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking at the moment of parliamentary ratification. That's the basic. I was one step ahead on state ratification. Obviously, if you don't get the 2/3 requisite, you don't have a constitutional amendment. Obviously, it requires a constitutional amendment. The committee also says so. Now, the question is whether it will happen politically or not. I am certainly ill-equipped and not half as smart and savvy as the ruling party in getting numbers. Now, whether they get numbers by fair means or foul means, the last 10-12 years have shown us the pattern of conduct. There are also a number of parties which are marginal parties, which kind of change loyalties all the time. So that question is something which only time will tell. But it's going to be a very narrow, there's no clear majority which they have in parliament. And I doubt if every segment of every ally will also support it only at the parliamentary level. At the state level, there's no question about it. They will not.
Okay. Now, I want to go through some of the points of the Kovind Committee, which recommended One Nation, One Poll. There is the economic impact as well, which they speak about. It's a controversial statement, but they suggest that there could be a boost in economic growth by up to 1.5% of GDP. While perhaps not enough evidence has been provided, this has been looked at as an economic rationale. How would you respond?
You are using words of studied moderation, Vishnu. While it may not have been provided, is what you said. You tell me any basis to say this gigantic, remarkable, and quite ridiculous statement that 1.5% of GDP will change because you have synchronized elections. The first thing you do in a proper system is you share the data, how you calculated it. This is a conclusion. A conclusion doesn't mean reasons or data. The problem is arising is that you have decided to do it, so you have to come up with the reason. Absolutely no basis. And I'll give you 2 very quick short answers in addition to this, on this subject, on this aspect. People forget, so first of all, absolutely no evidence. Completely superficial, thrown in the air, plucked out of the blue. And the first thing they do should have shared the data. Second, the elections as they are held already generate taxes, commerce, economic activity of a high nature. And if monetary saving is your biggest object, do you know that a one-time investment in increasing EVMs or whatever form of voting you want, we have lots of problems with EVMs on the political front, but whatever form of voting you have, you increase that number and have elections in a maximum cycle of 3 to 4 weeks. Hive off 3 weeks, you have it today in 7 weeks. The amount of saving there is much more humongous. Apart from the fact that elections are not anti-economic activity. So really, it is just actually appealing to the drawing room classes, the chattering classes, to our sense of order, discipline. The P's are properly put, the T's are cut, the I's are dotted, and everything is organized. You press the reset button, it happens in synchronization. This already happened in the natural course till 1967. But what happens now from 2034 onwards, when Vishnu's government or collectivity of Vishnu and his MLAs or MPs falls, 2 years or 3 years are left. You will have a reset button, that you have an election, and contrary to the will of the people, it should be normally for 5 years, this set of people, that is Vishnu and his colleagues, will get elected for 3 years only. What happens if 5 or 6 states happen like this? You'll keep on resetting. And it is passed away in the committee by one delightful sentence. It says, it will be a rare occurrence. It may require once or twice. Well, the whole idea of democracy is it is a festival of diversity, of uncertainty, of spontaneity of will. You cannot legally order the mandate of the will of the people. In fact, you are violating the basic structure, because the will of the people for a full 5-year term is being artificially superimposed by law to a 2, 3, 4-year term by artificial synchronization.
All right, Dr. Singhvi, thanks very much for sharing your views on One Nation, One Poll. Thank you very much indeed, sir. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, joining us now, a very special guest, N.K. Singh, one of the finest economists in India, somebody who's been involved in administration at so many levels, and somebody who's also had a big say in the Kovind Panel report, which looked at One Nation, One Election. Thank you, Mr. Singh, very much for being with us. One of the problems, or one of the key points which has been mentioned, is that the present system of elections, where we've got separate elections at the Assembly and at the centre, ends up being far too expensive. If One Nation, One Election were to happen, could you tell us how it would be a more cost-effective solution?
Well, I think in two very direct ways, Vishnu. One is that the repetitive nature of the elections add to repetitive costs. Costs in terms of the time lost in the model code of conduct, detracting the focus of those elected from governance to fighting the next election. In terms of the deployment of the law and order machinery, repetitively for purposes of holding separate elections, which is not inconsiderable. In terms of the fact that the investor confidence and uncertainty detracts from investment decisions, waiting for the outcome of the government, if that is done several times. In terms of the interruption of continuing production process by companies who wish to look for a predictable government, and has tangible and intangible costs. So I think that if you add all this, both episodically and in terms of the data which you have given, and the paper which presented by me and my colleague Prachi suggests that it could make an enormous difference of 1.5% of GDP, which is at current prices 9 lakh crores, which is an enormous amount of expenditure. In terms of the quality of expenditure, the emphasis moving towards from capital expenditure to revenue expenditure,
right,
moving repetitively.
I just wanted to understand that the number of 1.5% of GDP, how it would be an enhancement to our GDP by 1.5%. Could you, because that's what the opposition has been saying is not based on numbers, when in fact you have gone into substantive analysis to explain how it would help our GDP growth. Could you explain to us in simple terms how that would work?
Well, that's expenditure. In terms of, and we know that capital expenditure has multiplier effects on growth, on employment, and in putting a much higher quality of life. So in terms of the quality of expenditure, moving away from revenue expenditure to capital expenditure requires no explanation, because pre-election political parties place emphasis on revenue expenditure instead of capital expenditure. So that's one area. Secondly, you see in terms of educational outcomes, our study shows that deployment of teachers repetitively for purposes of becoming polling officers detracts from the quality, and educational outcomes are far worse.
Yeah.
In terms of the spurt in crime rates, which, because the deployment of the policemen and the personnel, even from the state administration, notwithstanding the paramilitary forces, repetitively has costs and cost consequences. As I said, that investment decisions by potential investors get postponed, and a climate of uncertainty has costs which we all know are intangible but very significant. So if you add up and aggregate all these, and the example which we have given in our paper is whenever those states which have followed synchronized elections, then states which have gone in for asynchronized elections have demonstrated significant changes in rates of economic growth, which we have, on which we have given empirical data. I earnestly urge that those who are critical of this would take some time. This is all available on the website, and if it would be of enormous value in carrying this debate forward, because it's not going to end tomorrow. There's going to be further work on it, and I think that I hope this work continues. But if they do look at the paper and the data and the analysis which we have put forward, there would be more than a ring of credibility to what we have put forward in our recommendations.
There are two views as far as enhancing administrative efficiency. You argue that, in fact, there would be less strain on the administrative mechanism which presently operates now, where it's almost constantly deployed, if not every year, then every other year for some election or the other. There are those who say that given the scale of holding assembly and national elections together, there would be more strain on the administrative efficiency of the system per se. Could you explain to us where you stand on this?
Well, Vishnu, this is slightly, if you ask me, in a lighter vein. Those who are critically opposed to it have gone so further as to say that this would impinge on the basic structure of the Constitution, namely the centerpiece of a working federal entity, which is what India is. Now, considering the fact, Vishnu, that we all know that till 1967, elections to state and assemblies are all held together. You mean federalism was only born in this country after 1968? So, I mean, until 67, if we found ourselves competent enough to do so, even some states this time in the last elections have had state elections along with the parliamentary general elections. So it was managed exceedingly well. There were no such complaints which we have seen, that it either cast an onerous burden on the law and order machinery or on the governance administrative structure, that there were no other administrative complications of this, or for several of the states which have gone in for synchronized elections. So this argument, in my view, will not stand the scrutiny of any analytical coherence if they read the totality of the scheme of things which we have submitted in our recommendation to the committee. Lots of points there.
Thank you, sir, very much for speaking to us and explaining it in simple terms. There's so many questions which are raised, and we do need answers. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Vishnu. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.